Early voting is underway in Virginia's governor's race. Election day is just 6 weeks away on November 2nd. Polls show former governor and current Democratic nominee Terry McAuliffe running about 3 percentage points ahead of his Republican challenger, former private equity executive Glenn Youngkin. The off-year race is often looked at as an indicator of voter attitudes heading into the 2022 midterms. It is also a test to see if Democrats can hold on to gains they made in 2020 without former President Donald Trump on the ballot. Virginia Public Radio reporter Michael Pope joins me now with more. Hi there, Michael. Thanks very much for being with us. So we showed the numbers. How tight is this race?
Well, it's tighter than a lot of Democrats would like it to be right now. So if you think about Biden winning Virginia last year, Biden won with like a 10-point lead. Our current governor, Democrat Ralph Northam, won with like a 9-point lead. So the polling that shows McAuliffe ahead by about 3 points is a whole lot tighter than it's been in recent election cycles. So that could indicate that the Republicans have found kind of a post-Trump message that they can craft for Virginia. And of course, it will be seen as an indicator for things to come in 2022 and beyond.
Well, Terry McAuliffe has booked $2 million worth of ads through Election Day. Republican Glenn Youngkin is spending just over $1 million. What are the big themes that Virginians can expect in these final weeks?
Well, they're going to see a whole lot of ads. There's no question about that. Lots of money is being thrown at the airwaves on this. You know, there are two themes that I've seen in the television ads. One is abortion and the other is vaccines. So you've seen a lot of abortion television commercials from both of these candidates. Each of them is trying to portray the other guy as being too extreme. That Republican Glenn Youngkin says Democrat Terry McAuliffe is too extreme and he would allow for things like late-term abortions. And then you have the Democrat in the race, former Governor Terry McAuliffe, saying the Republican is too extreme because he has said that he is pro-choice, although he hasn't really sort of pinned down where he is on a lot of the specific policy issues. Like Republican Glenn Youngkin has not said whether or not he is in favor of an ultrasound requirement before a woman can get an abortion, or whether or not he's in favor of a 24-hour waiting period before a woman can get an abortion. So there's still some policy issues to work out on the abortion issue, but we're seeing a lot of television commercials on it. The other is on vaccine mandates and the coronavirus. And so you see doctors in these ads. And the Democrat Terry McAuliffe is, for vaccine mandates. And so he's got doctors saying the other guy is too extreme. And then you've got doctors in the Youngkin ad, or a doctor in the Youngkin ad, saying McAuliffe is lying about my record. And the funny thing about these ads is they often air back to back. So you get sort of dueling doctors back and forth on the coronavirus issues.
I'd like to see the focus group react to that. What actually gets through, or do they end up canceling each other out? But that's for another time, I guess. So what about the suburbs? Suburban voters were critical, of course, in President Biden's 2020 victory in practically every battleground state. How do they factor into Virginia's gubernatorial race?
So the suburbs are key for elections in Virginia. They're really key for elections everywhere. If you followed the election in Canada last night, the suburbs were a key to the Canadian elections as well.
Wow.
Here in Virginia, I think part of the issue is, what do you want to call a suburb? Because if you look at this most recent polling from the Washington Post and the Schar School at George Mason University, we saw there are parts of Virginia that are going for Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, Loudoun County, Prince William County. I think a lot of people would consider that a suburb, but there's another way of looking at that where it's an exurb. So,
because they're farther away from Washington, D.C., for people who aren't familiar, right? So those would be not as close in as some of the other communities that would be more traditionally thought of as quote-unquote suburbs.
And that's the distance issue. The closer you are to the metropolitan urban area, the more likely you are to be a supporter of Democrat former Governor Terry McAuliffe. The further away from the metropolitan area you are, the more likely you are to be a supporter of Republican Glenn Youngkin. So the battle is really between those two areas, like the further out suburbs and the closer in exurbs, I guess you could say.
Really interesting. Well, last year's exit polls showed Virginia independents favoring Joe Biden by 19 points over Donald Trump. Recent polling by the Washington Post shows that group of voters narrowly favoring Republican Glenn Youngkin for governor. So what could be driving that shift?
Yeah, this really has people talking. This part of the Washington Post Schar School poll that showed this swing of independent voters has really captured people's attention because, as you point out, that that Biden won the independent voters by 9 points last year, and then now we've seen a swing where the independents are favoring the Republican in the race by 9 points. So, what accounts for that swing? I think part of what we're seeing here is a fatigue with Democrats. You know, if the same poll had Biden's approval at like 46, which is pretty low. So I think one way to read that swing of independents is just an unease with Democratic leadership, perhaps some fatigue with Afghanistan and the foreign policy. Biden has been having a kind of a rough week. And so, we might be seeing independent voters kind of react to the national scene, which frequently does happen in Virginia, having these odd year elections following a presidential year. Oftentimes they are kind of a reaction to what's happening in Washington and sort of an early indicator of what people think about the newly elected president.
Yeah, and you wonder, too, whether the fact that, Terry McAuliffe, he is not a new name in Democratic politics. So being a known quantity, how does that factor into things? It'll be interesting to watch that develop. Well, Republicans are suing to try to remove Terry McAuliffe from the ballot based on a technicality. Where do you see this case going?
Yeah, so this is an odd thing. So keep in mind, voting has already started in Virginia. So in order to get Terry McAuliffe off the ballot, you would have to literally throw out votes that have already been cast. The ballots, of course, have already been printed, so you'd have to throw out the ballots that have already been printed. At issue here is a document to get Terry McAuliffe's name on the primary ballot. So this is actually a document from way earlier in the year, February, March, something like that, the declaration of candidacy. And his signature is not on it. And that's clearly a fault of the campaign. And so there is actually more than one lawsuit to say that he shouldn't, be rightfully elected. His name should not be on the ballot. I think any judge looking at that is really going to have to consider the fact that voting is already going on and has been since Friday. And so in order to get Terry McAuliffe's name off of the ballot, you would literally have to throw out votes that have already been cast.
All right, 6 weeks. I cannot wait. Michael Pope. Michael, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.